I ran the numbers. We're living in a scientific impossibility. Elements simply couldn't expand fast enough to reach this level of density under natural conditions. To spread it to any significant degree, you need a huge spike in element proliferation. A spike you get from, say, a century of open warfare with element-based weaponry. And the best of that weaponry? That'd be mine.
Element is the catalyst for the deep narrative saga that is ARK Survival Evolved in its entirety. From the very creation of the ARKs themselves to Rockwell's descent into madness and cosmic conquest, the influence of Element is a pervasive, shadowy hand shaping every event in ARK's story. Though beneath the surface level knowledge of Element many may have lies a pivotal, yet underdeveloped aspect of pre-ARK lore. An event that set into motion everything we know today. A cataclysmic struggle for control over Element and its immense power, spanning the 23rd and 24th centuries between both the United Republics of Earth and the Terran Federation. One that would ultimately result in the downfall of not just mankind, but planet Earth as we know it. Today, we dive into the Element Wars.
Never let go.
We aren't sure how or when exactly the United Republics of Earth or Terran Federation were formed, be it a result of discovering Element or the natural course of human progress in Earth politics centuries into our future. However, what we do know is what each respective side went on to do with Element once they got their hands on it, as it not only played an essential part in their rise to power, but their inevitable downfall as well. The United Republics of Earth were exactly that, a collective of republic countries spread across the world. Said republics included, but weren't limited to, the hypothetical Pan-Asian Alliance, which encompasses most, if not all, Asian countries from Japan all the way to Turkey, and many of the countries represented in the modern-day United Nations, with a few exceptions. Oh, and New Zealand, which, if you know anything about ARK lore, you'd know will be important later. Upon Element's discovery, as both a people and a government, the URE used it in order to transcend the limitations of their human bodies and minds through advanced technological augmentations, a philosophy known as transhumanism. They found their counterpart in the Terran Federation, a global conglomerate with nation-level power. Their federated states included the United States of America, or at least the West Coast, Brazil, and the hypothetical Unified Central America, though similarly to the URE, this isn't an exhaustive list. Where the nations truly diverged was how they sought to advance mankind into the future. Whereas the URE aimed to enhance the human experience by embracing transhumanism and achieving the next step in human evolution, the Federation wished to use tech in order to achieve better, individually autonomous lives for all, without external forces, an ideal known as humanism. But when these two ideologies clashed, the results were, in the grand scope of things, cataclysmic.
At first, transhumanism seemed like a mirror version of those old-timey, crystal-healing nuts who rejected modern medicine. Wackos, grooving on the energies of the miracle discovery powering all our shiny tech junk. Used to think I was just as big on tech, back when I was hacking media feeds and jailbreaking police bots in the favelas. But when they started with all their brain modifications and neuroprosthetics, I stopped understanding them. Not that I agreed with the Fed crackdown. If someone wanted to disappear up their own interface port and commune with the infinite, I figured that was their business. Who'd have thought we'd all end up going to war over that bullshit?
It started out small at first, when the Federation began to crack down on transhuman activity within its federated states, leading to events such as the Transhuman Purist Guard conflict of 2329 and the Transhumanists' rights riots of 2331. It was increasingly violent confrontations such as these, which likely fueled even greater ones, like that of the Battle of Thailand Gulf.
Cosmo's been my wingman since the Battle of the Thailand Gulf, when the orbital carrier collapsed and we appeared here.
While we aren't told a lot about the Battle of Thailand Gulf, it is mentioned offhandedly in Extinction, in Diana Log number 23, and is likely the earliest break of tension between the two nations we currently know of in the ARK timeline. This battle, which may or may not have actually happened for reasons I'll get to later, is also where survivors Diana Altaras and Kazuma Takeya remember dying for the first time. One interesting thing to note about this conflict is its location, the Thailand Gulf, making this appear to be a provocation from the Terran Federation on United Republic's territory, a pattern we'll only continue to see going forward with the timeline. As war between the two nations became more and more intense, so too did the weaponry and devastation from each side, the largest proprietor of which being a man named Santiago Da Costa, the Terran Federation's single most valuable asset, a jack of trades and master of all.
Yeah, as in the Santiago that's so famous he's only got one name, as in the guy who hacked into URE Command one day and reverse engineered our latest tech armor the next. That Santiago.
Santiago was many things. The lead director of the Terran Federation tech weapons program with expertise in data terrorism, hacking, infiltrating, etc. When Santiago wasn't chilling watching Nanos on YouTube in his mountain villa, he was performing corporate espionage, terrorizing the URE by reverse engineering their own technology and designing devastating tech weapons of mass destruction which would lead to their ultimate annihilation. One example of this ultimate annihilation being Operation Metal Rain,
resulting in the third bombing from low orbit of the URE bases in New Zealand. All cities in the country are now in ruins. As an immediate retaliation against the Federation, the entire West Coast has been lost due to...
Comparably to the Battle of Thailand Gulf, Operation Metal Rain is included as a small addendum to Santiago Note number 23 in Genesis 2, in the form of a news article, and is the latest act of war on the timeline we know, which just so happens to be yet another example of the Federation attacking the URE, provoking them to level the entire west coast of the United States of America as an act of mutually assured destruction, a far cry from the transhumanist riots which had initially sparked the Element Wars. As the Element Wars raged on, the United Republics of Earth repeatedly warned the Terran Federation to lay down their arms and turn their attention to an issue which could wipe out not just the two nations, but all life on Earth as they knew it. Yet, time and time again, those in power of the Federation adamantly refused to hear whatever the URE was telling them. That is, until they ultimately lost their trump card that was Santiago. The details of Santiago's death aren't yet clear to us, outside the fact that, according to Uma in Genesis 2, he not only died a hero, but that he had died to help end the war as a whole. A photograph taken by URE intelligence an indeterminate amount of time before his death shows his last known location, in what would appear to be the Terran Federation Arms shipyard in unified Central America.
Uma tells me I died a hero my first time around, that I helped end the war. I guess I'll have to take her word for it, since they didn't let me remember how that went down. I remember a childhood in Sao Paulo, a life spent designing tech gear and munitions for the feds, but I'm not really that guy anymore, am I?
Only after losing Santiago did the Federation stop persecuting the United Republics of Earth long enough to listen to what they had to say. But by then, it was already too late. The damage had been done. In 2347, a unification peace treaty was declared in Sweden in the URE Neo-UN Main Auditorium, officially concluding the Element Wars for good. In the following year of 2348, an Element Crisis Conference was held in Nizhny, Russia, as leading tech experts from both nations united in order to combat a new problem: raw element proliferation.
It took this long for the stubborn bastards running the Terran Federation to accept what their enemy was telling them, that our planet is terminally ill. The evidence must have been damned convincing for them to let the transhumans help us with our getaway plan.
Element works in a funny way. You see, you can never really run out of Element, as it quite literally grows out of itself infinitely. And when element is used as fuel, whether it be for a weapon, a piece of armor, or for whatever the fuck this thing is, it releases trace amounts of unrefined element into the air, which takes root in the soil and grows into more element nodes given enough time. This, in and of itself, wouldn't be an issue if it wasn't for the fact that, when in this natural, unrefined state, element emits unnaturally high levels of radiation, supposedly higher than that of something like polonium or oganesson, the latter of which being shit that was developed in a Russian laboratory for the sole purpose of, we may as well, that can't exist for even a millisecond before it decays into another element known as livermorium.
The uses for it were beyond counting. Hardier than tungsten, more versatile than copper. In the right form, its ability to generate electricity and produce radiation were unrivaled.
Combine this little factoid with tech warfare unprecedented enough to be leveling entire countries and turning battlegrounds into radiated hellscapes, and it's not hard to imagine the consequences that followed. Infrastructure collapse, loss of natural habitats, and unpredictable weather disasters. All of it ensued as a result of the now uncontrollable, ever-growing proliferation of toxic element throughout the world. Thus began construction of the Genesis colony ship.
Hey, survivor!
A concept collaborated on by the Terran Federation humanists and the United Republics of Earth transhumanists, hand in hand as a way to colonize some far-off planet with Earth life. Santiago was even cloned in order to aid Genesis as a project director, before being blown to smithereens in a bombing carried out by a distraught coworker, after which the transhumanists split off to finalize their own side project in that of the ARKs, with hopes of one day returning life to Earth if element ever subsided, which, you know, it didn't. For being what are essentially hyper-intelligent human supercomputers, the transhumanists' plan sucked ass. It sucked ass. And so, hundreds, if not thousands of years later, all that would remain of either nation would be the long, decrepit Homo Deus set to watch over cloned survivors in the ARK network, a distant civilization of Genesis ship crewmates who oversaw the mission for generations only to be massacred by Rockwell after he hijacked the ship for his own purposes, and the vampires of Arap Prime who would appear to be the descendants of those left on Earth to survive the extinction-level cataclysm. Long after the Element Wars had concluded and Earth had been left in ruin, a new generation of survivors were cloned upon the aberrant Ark, a lush paradise filled with mushrooms, element ore, and, well, a side of dinosaurs. Can't forget those.
You know, this whole staving off the ever-looming specter of despair thing would be a lot easier without all the dinosaurs. Did I not mention those? I should have mentioned those. At least the weather's holding up. We've had clear skies for 3 days now, and it was a good idea to start giving people call signs too. The newbie suggested rubberneck for me, since I keep looking at the sky. But I can't help it. It's really gorgeous here. A perfect blue.
This generation of survivors were especially unique in the fact that they were all either from the URE or the Federation, cloned onto an Ark laden with the same alien resource they had used to kill each other, wrecking Earth in the process. Or that they would go on to use, I should say, as none of the aberrant survivors actually had complete memories of the Element Wars. In their minds, they had only lived up into the early stages of the war, rather than having witnessed the all-out global destruction which had occurred near its end. Not only that, but not once does the concept of transhumanism get brought up by any of these survivors during the events of aberration, nor extinction where their stories continue. Now, we don't actually know whether or not this is an aspect of their memories which have been altered, or if it just so happens to not have been brought up for whatever reason. Though it's likely that the cause of the Element War was just left intentionally ambiguous until Genesis 2, this still makes me wonder what version of events would have caused the rift between the United Republics of Earth and the Terran Federation for the survivors on aberration, if not transhumanism.
The more the camp's grown, the more tense things have become with the Feddies, so today I decided to break the ice. Whatever's happening between the United Republics of Earth and the Terran Federation and the rest of the world doesn't matter. We're all in this together, right?
Concerning the events of the Element Wars, those aforementioned altered memories create 2 points of contention I'd like to take a deeper look at. The first of which being the Battle of Thailand Gulf, which, as I mentioned earlier, may or may not have actually taken place. Like most of the Aberrant survivors' memories relating to the Element Wars, the Battle of Thailand Gulf is likely a memory fabricated by the Aberrant ARK, at least partially. There's nothing outright disproving the battle's existence in its entirety, though there is evidence to support the idea that Diana in specific never really died there. If my understanding of events is correct, her supposed death had occurred during an earlier part of the war. This, in and of itself, wouldn't be a problem if it weren't for the relationship between Diana and Santiago before their time on the Arks, and the existence of their daughter Mika, who was conceived during an unknown, though assumedly later point during the war. Because Diana's memories on Aberration end before she had even met Santiago, let alone had a child with him, it'd be safe to assume that Diana never truly died in that orbital carrier collapse. Instead, she had been given implanted memories in order to obscure the actual details of the Element Wars. And while the same can't be said about how Kazuma remembers his own death or the existence of the Battle of Thailand Gulf as a whole, it does make you wonder what other memories the Arks could have transplanted onto other clone survivors in the story. You reach the second point of contention when taking into consideration how long the Element Wars actually lasted. In Santiago log number 7 on extinction, he theorizes that, due to the sheer volume of element proliferating the Earth's surface, the war had to have entailed at least a century of open warfare using weapons he had designed. Assuming this information is accurate, taking into account the end year of the Element Wars, that being 2347, and working that number backwards gives us a starting year of 2247, which quickly falls apart when you remember that transhumanism, something Santiago is implied to have seen the introduction of, is what caused the war to begin with. If this is the case, and there's no reason to believe it's not, it would make Santiago over a century old by the time the URE and Federation Unification Peace Treaty was declared. With the earliest known date about the URE and Federation conflict leading up to the war being the transhuman Purist Guard conflict of 2329, this gives us a documented timeline of only 18 years, from 2329 to 2347, a far cry from the century of open warfare Santiago estimated in extinction. I'll be honest when I say I got stumped here, as though Santiago not having full memories of the Element Wars is what inadvertently leads him to this conclusion, the conclusion itself isn't a fabricated memory, rather it's the result of one. So, with nowhere else to turn, I emailed ARK's lead writer Peter Fries, hoping that he could clear up my confusion. And sure enough, he emailed me back. Dear Peter Fries, hi, it's me, Nano. I email you this morning inquiring about any/all information you are able and willing to provide regarding the Element War of ARK, and have created a small list of questions for the occasion. Q. Is the Terran Federation a global conglomerate? Q. What were the two primary nations like before the introduction of elements to the end of the element timeline between Santiago's occupied by the Federation and URE respectively? Q. How long did the Element Wars actually last approximately? Diana describes only tensions between the two nations on Aberration. The first mention of a proper battle is on extinction. Due to this, it's been theorized that the Element War started with a sort of Cold War before evolving into the all-out destruction that's described in Genesis 2. It was initially speculated by Santiago in Santiago log number 7 that the Element Wars lasted approximately a century, though considering the aforementioned all-out destruction that's described in Genesis 2, this seems unlikely. And send. Hey Nano, sorry to have taken so long to respond. I've been pretty busy with Lost Colony writing lately. That said, you're probably going to be disappointed with my vague non-answers. A. To my admittedly non-comprehensive knowledge, we don't know much about the nature of the Federation or its explicitly something I'm going to avoid commenting having about the Santiago Da Costa still known as transhumanist debate the genesis that was probably done soonish after the end of probably not humanity was facing an immediate existential worldwide crisis. A. I personally like your suggestion of a long-lasting Cold War leading to a shorter, all-out global war. But again, I don't believe we've spelled out any of those details. Best wishes, and thanks for all you do to support our game and strengthen its community of players. Peter. While this doesn't necessarily spell out a clear-cut answer, Freeze does at least like my proposal of a Cold War between the URE and Federation, which could easily explain away this one big inconsistency with the Element Wars. Under this context, it's possible that the United Republics of Earth and the Terran Federation not only existed for around a century, if not longer, but that for reasons unknown, they were entrenched in a Cold War for approximately 8 decades until the introduction of transhumanists, and the subsequent Element Wars that followed, with characters like Santiago and Diana having been born into the already ongoing Cold War. That, or Santiago's theory in extinction, could just be wrong, because after all, it is just a theory. And that has been a full breakdown of ARK's Element Wars, something that I hope will be expanded upon in Lost Colony, seeing as, excluding Extinction Ascended, it'll be our first time setting foot back on Earth in over 6 years. So I truly hope Studio Wildcard continues this pattern and fleshes out more of the Element Wars and pre-ARK lore in general. That said, I'd like to give a huge thank you to my patrons over on Patreon, including but not limited to Nathan Hildebrandt and No Quest of the Ascended Survivor tier. And a special thank you to Peter Freeze for answering some questions I had in the making of this video. You are genuinely awesome. Thank you all so much for your continued support, and I'll see you all next time. Until then.